President, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for welcoming me to this great university, the first institution in the US devoted solely to biomedical research, and for that more than effusive introduction. I also want to thank the prize-giving committee for inviting me to participate in the presentation of this significant award. I do applaud Dr. Greengard's initiative, and I give heartfelt congratulations to this year's award winner, Dr. Lucy Shapiro. This is by way of being a celebration, but let me start on a somber note. Explain why I am wearing this poppy. It is to commemorate the dead from the different wars. The practice of wearing poppies started in this country, in New York, in 1918. World War I, the Great War, the war that was supposed to stop all future wars. In that war, General Pershing led 1.4 million Americans, of whom 117,000 died. Armistice was declared at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. The losses for World War II, the deadliest war ever, included 407,000 Americans. This Veterans Day is a day for remembrance. I've been asked to share my research history with you and do so with pride and English-style humility. I'm a technology entrepreneur and advocate for autism, determined to transition science into service delivery. The Science Council listed me recently as one of the top practicing scientists in the UK. As you've heard, I was born in Germany into a respectable family, and if all had gone according to plan, I would have remained in that bourgeois, comfortable world indefinitely. It's unlikely that I would have ever had experienced what Picasso called the ultimate seduction, work. We never know what life holds for us. All that I am stems from when I was 5 years old and was put onto a kinder train in Vienna, one of the dozen or so trains organized to save 10,000 mainly Jewish children from Nazi Europe. I'm only alive because so long ago I was saved by generous strangers. Each train had about 1,000 children, aged 5 to 16, a few 17-year-olds also snuck in, with just 2 adults. There were also a few girls, aged 16 plus, so not eligible to come out, but they were caring for babies. And of course, I didn't know at the time, but those volunteers traveled under a concession dependent on their return to what they must have known was almost certain death. I like always to honor the sheer heroism of those young people. The trauma of that experience triggered in me 2 things. I learned to accept change, that tomorrow is going to be different to today and certainly nothing like yesterday. And that led to my eventually welcoming change, which was pretty useful for me in my high-tech area. And secondly, I decided at a very young age to make mine a life that was worth saving. Then I just got on with it. That was 75 years ago. You see before you a museum piece. I'm in the National Museum of Computing in England as a late pioneer of the discipline, and some of my early work papers are in the American Computer Museum. So where did my success come from? To circumvent the gender issues of the time, this was in the 1950s, I set up my own high-tech software company, one of the UK's first such startups. It was a company of women. It was a company for women, an early social business. People laughed at the very idea. Software at that time was given away with the hardware. Nobody would buy software, certainly not from a woman. Although women were then coming out of the universities with decent degrees, there was a glass ceiling to our progress. But I wanted opportunities for women. I recruited professionally qualified women who had left the computer industry on marriage or when their first child was expected and structured them into a home-working organization. We pioneered the concept of women going back into the workforce after a career break. We pioneered a whole lot of new work methods. We pioneered all sorts of flexible working, job shares, then profit shares, and later, as you've heard, co-ownership. I sewed the shares into the hands of the staff at no cost to anyone but me. I was a pathfinder in the professionalism of women, especially in high tech. And for years, I was the first woman this, the only woman that. My generation of women fought the battles for the right to work and for equal pay. When handsome young men used to offer to carry my equipment for me, I used to reply somewhat tetchily, I believe in equal pay and will carry my own equipment. Nowadays, it's, how kind. Thank you so much. No one expected much from women in work because all the expectations were about home and family responsibilities. I couldn't accept that, and so challenged the conventions of the day. Even as you've heard, to the extent of changing my name from Stephanie to Steve in my business development letters, so that I got through that door before anyone realized that he was a she. It couldn't have started smaller. On the dining room table, with what would now be $100, but financed by my own labor and by borrowing against the marital home. My interests were scientific. The market was commercial. Things such as payroll, which I found excruciatingly boring. So I went for operational research, which was both intellectually satisfying and commercially valued. Stock control, scheduling freight trains, timetabling coaches. Gradually, the work came in. We disguised the domestic and part-time nature of the workforce by offering fixed prices. Who would have guessed that the software for the black box flight recorder for the supersonic Concorde was done by a bunch of women working in their own homes? An early project for Diebold was to develop software standards, management control protocols. Software was, and still is, a maddeningly hard to pin down activity. So that was enormously valuable to be paid to do that. And we used the standards ourselves, and we even paid to update them over the years. And eventually, they were adopted by NATO. Our programmers worked with pencil and paper to develop flowcharts defining the task to be done. They then wrote code, either in machine code or sometimes even in binary, which was sent by mail to a data center for punching onto punch cards or paper tape. And then they were repunched in order to verify that. All this prior to submission to the mainframe computer. That was programming in the early 60s. When I started my company of women, the men sort of said, how interesting. But of course, it only works because it's small. And as the company grew, the same men commented, Yes, it's sizable now, but of no strategic interest. And later still, when it was a gazillion-dollar business and 70 of my colleagues were also multimillionaires, they commented, "Well done, Steve." What an attitude to change. You can always tell ambitious women by the shape of our heads. They're flat on top from being patted patronizingly. Sometimes we have larger feet to stand away from the kitchen sink, because women still have a long way to go. In 1975, 13 years from the company's startup, Britain's equal opportunities legislation came in, making it illegal to have our pro-female policies. As an example of unintended consequences, my woman's company had to let the men in. When the company was acquired after 45 years, it was quoted on the London Stock Exchange and employed over 8,000 people, men and women, which is as it should be. Let me share with you two secrets of commercial success. Employ only people who are better than you are. And be careful to choose a supportive partner. The other day when I said, my husband's an angel, a woman complained. "You're lucky," she said, "mine's still alive." If success were easy, we'd all be millionaires. In my case, it came in the midst of family pressures. Our son, Giles, was an only child, a beautiful, contented baby. And then at 2.5, like a changeling in a fairy story, he lost the little speech that he had and turned into a wild, unmanageable toddler. Not the terrible twos. He was autistic, and he never spoke again. My mission is pioneering, never more of the same, no matter how wonderful or how worthy, and always strategic. And what do I mean by that? Things that, if successful, will make a real difference, that produce tangible results in the sea of need. And in the only two things really, that I know and care about, and that is information technology, my professional discipline, and autism, my late son's disorder. He died at the age of 35. Classically, Giles had been the first resident in the first home of the first charity that I set up. It was founded to pioneer services to autism. It took 17 years to become financially and managerially independent of me, because it's not enough to do good. It has to be sustainable. Later, I founded a very special residential school for pupils with autism. This also now has an adult learning center. That only took me 5 years. Then an autism lobbying charity, 2 years to get that going. My most recent charity, Autistica, funds medical research to understand what autism is as distinct from what it looks like. I mean, I can recognize an autistic child the other side of the playground, but we really don't understand yet what it is. And my training for that really came from this country, because I served 2 years as a trustee of the American charity that morphed into Autism Speaks. My current emphasis is on setting up a national autism project, a sort of modern think tank. And that's scheduled to keep me busy for the next 3 years. Not only do I pay tribute to Dr. Paul Greengard for sponsoring this prize, but I also applaud his discoveries on the genetics of autism. To date, I've donated a lot of money, investment really, in not-for-profit projects, mainly in autism. Giving is all that I do now. I need never worry about getting lost, because several charities would quickly come and find me. Despite the vastly different fields, the basic journey of research is generic. Discover, gather, analyze, create, share. Though I recognize that replication is the cornerstone of good science, I love to learn. I love to do new things and make new things happen. But research calls on different skills, so there's potential for many of us to have the beautiful but frightening experience of being the first to know something. Women are not just consumers, but also creators of new technologies and applications, and it's important to recognize outstanding women in science. So many have already been written out of the history of science. The very first programmer was the scarcely known Ada Lovelace, the daughter of the mad, bad, and dangerous to know romantic poet Lord Byron. And she first put forward the idea that humanities and technologies should coexist. There's a picture in my study showing the hippocampus, part of the autistic brain. It is as beautiful as any work of art. Dr. Lucy Shapiro, who developed the very beginning of systems biology, comments as an artist about the beauty of the entire living world and sees the sciences as part of the arts. She credits much of her success to her roles as mother and grandmother. Her children anchored her. And that resonates with my experiences with my autistic child. She and I also share a powerful sense of social responsibility. But we differ markedly in that she is able to work amicably with her husband. Whereas in no way could I work with my husband. He starts with detail and works from the bottom up. I start with general concepts and work top down. So we kill each other before we met somewhere in the middle. But now to the purpose of this wonderful evening. We're here to honor Dr. Lucy Shapiro, professor of Stanford University's School of Medicine, for her work in developmental biology. She is a role model for women scientists worldwide. May her life be as full and fulfilling as mine has been. Thank you very much.